I knew the HOA was going to be a problem the minute I moved into Heather Ridge Estates. Not because the neighborhood was bad, it was actually a nice place, but because the president of the HOA, Francine Bartlett, was the worst kind of middle-aged control freak. Platinum blonde bob, shrill voice, the kind of woman who thought laminated notices were a power move. She drove a pearl-white Tesla and weaponized the HOA handbook like it was scripture. My name's Grayson Sellers. I'm a commercial equipment mechanic. I keep to myself, pay my dues, and don't start fires. But apparently just being left alone was too much to ask. It started when I repainted my garage door. Same color, just freshened it up. Nothing wild. 2 days later, I got a violation notice taped to my front door. Unapproved modifications to exterior structure, it read. I took a photo of the untouched color sample card I'd submitted 3 weeks earlier with her signature approving it. So I walked over to the next HOA meeting, calmly showed the documentation, and asked, Francine, did you forget you signed off on this? She blinked like I'd spoken Latin, then said that was conditional. You didn't wait for final board approval. I raised an eyebrow. That's not how it works. She leaned in close with that fake smile. Well, maybe in your world, but not in Heather Ridge. That's when I knew she was picking a fight. Fast forward a week Saturday morning. I'm loading up my truck with tools to head to a job site when I see her Tesla parked directly in front of my garage. Not on the street. Not near it. Dead center, blocking me in. Her house is 3 doors down. I knock on her door. No answer. I ring the bell 3 times. Still nothing. 10 minutes later, I try calling the HOA number on file. No response. So I knock on my neighbor David's door. You seen Francine? She left earlier. Said she was going to teach someone a lesson. Whatever that means. I laughed. That someone's me. It was 90 degrees out, and I was sweating bullets. I had a crane install job across town and couldn't afford to miss it. So I did what any man with a forklift and a short fuse would do. I rolled my forklift out of the side yard, eased the forks under her Tesla like I'd done it 100 times because I had, and lifted it with the gentleness of a surgeon. A few neighbors came out and watched, wide-eyed. Grayson, one of them said, you're not actually gonna. Yup, I cut him off. I turned the forklift, drove slowly past my house, and hoisted her Tesla onto my flat garage roof. It's reinforced concrete. Held just fine. The moment I set it down, I could feel the satisfaction click into place like a socket wrench. I parked the forklift back in the yard and went to work. And that car stayed up there all week. By Wednesday afternoon, the neighborhood was divided into 2 camps. Those who thought what I did was legendary, and those who were too scared of Francine to say anything out loud. The Tesla still sat up there like a trophy, untouched. I'd been careful not to scratch it, and I'd even chalked the tires with rubber blocks so it wouldn't wobble. Still, it was an eyesore, but it wasn't my eyesore. I figured she'd come storming over the moment she saw it. But there was nothing. Not a knock, not a note. Just silence. That's when I started to get uneasy. Francine wasn't the type to swallow her pride. She wasn't hiding. She was planning. Friday, I came home from work to find a bright orange sticker slapped on my front door, notice of non-compliance, unregistered equipment storage. Right underneath, a second one, pending lien review. And taped to my mailbox, a third, community safety violation, unauthorized machinery use. I stared at them for a second, then pulled them off and walked straight to my garage. The forklift was gone. I checked the side gate. The lock had been cut. Deep tire impressions in the dirt led out to the street, ending where the curb had fresh scuffs. Someone had hauled it off. I called the police and filed a theft report. Officer Levin showed up 20 minutes later, took one look at the cut lock and said, "You sure it wasn't towed?" "Sometimes the city." "No," I cut in, handing him a photo of the forklift parked behind the gate, time-stamped from my security cameras. "Private property." "Gate was locked." He raised his eyebrows. "You got footage of it being taken?" I nodded and brought him inside. We watched together as a flatbed truck, no city markings, Just a white cab and a rusted trailer backed into my driveway the night before at around 2:30 in the morning. Two men got out, cut the lock, and winched the forklift up. They didn't even try to hide their faces. Levin frowned. Well, this isn't city ordered. That's definitely theft. You recognize either of them? I paused the footage on one frame, zoomed in, and pointed. That's Rick Langley. He's on the HOA board. Landscaping contractor. Levin wrote the name down. And the other? Looks like his nephew. He's done side jobs around here. Drives a white Dodge with a cracked tail light. The officer clicked his pen. All right, I'll file this and forward it to detectives. You'll want to call your insurance, too. What about the HOA? I asked. If they ordered this, if they're behind it, that's criminal conspiracy. But we'll need to prove that. After he left, I pulled the local zoning ordinances and checked the HOA bylaws. Nowhere did it say I couldn't own or store commercial equipment on my property. In fact, as long as it wasn't visible from the street, it was fine. My side yard was fenced in, 6 feet tall, and covered in ivy. I printed everything out and highlighted the relevant sections. That night, I went to the emergency HOA meeting Francine had called. It was held in the clubhouse, a beige box of a building that smelled like old carpet and lemon disinfectant. Francine stood at the front in a navy pantsuit, arms folded, lips pursed. Thank you all for coming, she said to the 20 or so residents seated in folding chairs. We have a serious issue of non-compliance and safety concerns at 1146 Birch Lane. That was my address. I stood near the back, arms crossed. She hadn't seen me yet. Francine continued, this resident has stored industrial machinery in a residential zone, in direct violation of our community safety guidelines. I raised my voice. That's a lie. She paused, eyes scanning the room until they met mine. Mr. Sellers, she said slowly, this is a private meeting for board matters. Then you shouldn't have taped fake citations to my house and had my property stolen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Francine's eyes narrowed. No one stole anything. The board acted within its rights to remove a safety hazard. Funny, I said, pulling out the printed zoning codes and bylaws, because none of these mention forklifts, or side yard storage, or the right of the board to enter private property without due process. She didn't answer. And by the way, I added, holding up a grainy printout from the surveillance footage, this is Rick Langley, on my property, 2:30 in the morning. No warrant, no notice, just bolt cutters and a trailer. Rick, sitting near the front, shifted in his seat but didn't speak. I stepped forward and laid the documents on the table. I've already filed a police report. They're looking into criminal conspiracy and trespassing. If this board wants to be part of that investigation, keep talking. Francine's teeth clenched. This isn't a courtroom. No, I said, but it will be. That night, 3 more homeowners came by to talk. One of them, Joanna, retired nurse, lived 2 blocks over, brought a binder of her own. They tried to fine me for painting my shutters last year, she said. Told me the shade was unauthorized. I had the receipt. It was the exact same brand and number they required. Another neighbor, Marcus, said they threatened to tow his work van because it had a company logo on the door. I'm a plumber, he said. It's my livelihood. We spent the next few hours compiling everything. Photos, notices, emails, even voice recordings Joanna had collected when Francine left voicemails threatening additional fees. By Sunday, we had a case file an inch thick. Monday morning, I called a friend of mine, Lorraine, a civil attorney with a reputation for cutting through red tape like a buzzsaw. I dropped the binder on her kitchen table and said, tell me we have something. She flipped through it page by page. You've got trespassing, theft, abuse of power, fraud, and harassment. That's just the first 20 minutes of reading. Can we sue the HOA? She looked up. Not just sue. We can depose them. Force a full audit. If there's money going missing, we'll find it. And if any of them misused funds or forged documents, that's felony territory. Then let's go, I said. She smiled. Oh, we're going. By Wednesday, Lorraine had filed a motion with the county court requesting a temporary injunction against the HOA for unlawful enforcement actions. The judge signed off on it within 24 hours. That meant no more fines, no more notices, and no more emergency meetings until the court could review our evidence. The best part? The motion included a subpoena for HOA financial records going back 5 years. Francine lost it. The next morning, a courier delivered a cease and desist letter to my door, signed by a firm in town, claiming I was defaming the HOA's reputation and creating a hostile environment. I brought it straight to Lorraine. She laughed. "They're bluffing. Tell them you'll respond with a counterclaim for harassment." That night, I hosted a meeting in my backyard. 36 homeowners showed up, more than had ever attended any official HOA meeting. We shared stories, compared documents, voted unanimously to form a watchdog committee. Turns out, Francine had been inflating landscaping invoices and approving them without board consensus. Rick's company had been getting paid double the market rate for basic services: mulching, mowing, seasonal planting. We printed everything, highlighted the discrepancies, cross-referenced dates and signatures. Lorraine helped us organize it into a formal complaint and submitted it to the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. We also filed a report with the district attorney's office. By Friday, Rick's truck was gone. His nephew, too. Francine's Tesla was still on my roof. She hadn't even tried to retrieve it. But the neighborhood? It had changed. People were talking, sharing, watching. For the first time in years, Francine wasn't in control. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of the end. By the following Tuesday, something shifted. When I pulled into my driveway after work, 2 unmarked sedans were parked along the curb, and a woman in a charcoal blazer stood on my porch with a badge clipped to her belt. She turned as I stepped out of my truck. "Mr. Sellers?" she asked. I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. "That's me, Detective Michelle Garvey, County Property Crimes Division. I'm following up on the equipment theft report you filed." I motioned toward the house. "You want to come in?" "Got the footage queued up already." Inside, she sat at the counter while I poured 2 glasses of water. As she watched the clip of Rick and his nephew breaking my gate, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Where's the forklift now?" she asked. "No idea. They haven't brought it back. And I haven't seen it pop up at any of Rick's job sites either. I've been watching." She tapped her pen against the counter. "I ran the plate on the tow truck. It's registered to a dissolved landscaping business that Rick used to operate. Technically, the vehicle's off the books. So he used a defunct company's truck to steal my machine," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "And here's where it gets worse. We pulled his financials after the audit request you all submitted. His current business is funneling HOA payments into that same inactive account." I leaned back in my chair. "He's laundering through a dead company." She nodded. "That's one way to put it. We've opened an investigation into fraudulent billing practices and criminal misappropriation of HOA funds." I pointed toward the roof without saying anything. She followed my gaze. "The Tesla? Still there?" She let out a slow breath. "We may need to leave it as is for now. If she claims you damaged it, she'd be filing under civil court. But if we can prove this is part of a retaliation pattern, it'll get tossed." "She hasn't even asked for it back," I said. "It's like she doesn't want anyone talking about it." Garvey closed her notebook. "She's probably hoping this all disappears before the state attorney gets involved." That night, I called Lorraine and filled her in. She was already ahead of me. "I subpoenaed the HOA's communications server," she said. Turns out Francine was sending instructions to Rick using a private email. "We found a message that actually says, and I quote, 'Remove the forklift. Do not make a scene. Use Rick's old truck if needed.'" I felt my jaw tighten. "That's premeditated theft. And conspiracy to commit it," she said. "We're sending it to the DA tomorrow." The next morning brought a cold front and something better, a letter from the county clerk's office. The judge had approved a motion to freeze the HOA's discretionary funds pending a full audit. That meant no more checks from the HOA to Rick. No more last-minute landscaping emergencies. No more blank invoices. By Thursday, Francine was nowhere to be seen. Her curtains stayed drawn and her garbage bins weren't put out. The neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. One of her former allies on the board, a guy named Hal, started distancing himself fast. He knocked on my door around dinner time, wringing his hands like a man on the edge. I didn't know how deep it went, he said before I even invited him in. I folded my arms. You voted to approve her emergency actions. I thought she had documentation, he said. She told us the forklift was a safety issue, that you'd refused multiple warnings. But when the audit started, I saw the real records. She doctored the minutes from 2 meetings. Did you report it? I will. I swear. I just didn't want you thinking I was part of that mess. I studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Come on in. I've got something you need to see. I showed him an audio recording. Joanna had captured it on her porch, a conversation between Francine and Rick where she told him make it disappear. If anyone asks, it was abandoned equipment. Hal paled. That's not just HOA stuff anymore. That's evidence tampering. Exactly, I said. By the weekend, subpoenas started flying. Rick's accounts were frozen. His office was raided by financial crimes investigators. Francine's house? Swarmed by 2 unmarked units and a warrant team from the DA's office. They took boxes of documents, a laptop, and her phone. I was in my garage when it happened. Watching from behind the open door, I saw her on the porch in a gray cardigan trying to play the victim. Her voice was high and cracking, but the detectives weren't buying it. They read her the charges calmly: wire fraud, conspiracy, falsifying public documents, misappropriation of community funds. By Monday, she'd posted bail, but the damage was done. That evening, I held another backyard meeting. This time, over 70 residents showed up. We had lawn chairs, coolers, and a projector set up on the side of my garage. Lorraine laid out the next steps. The court has appointed a temporary management trustee, she said. This means the HOA board is suspended until the audit is complete. Any fines issued in the last 18 months are frozen. If you paid one, keep your receipts. We're pursuing a class action for damages. Someone asked about the Tesla. Lorraine looked at me. You still have the key to the forklift? I nodded. Then I suggest we give her back her car. But let's do it with a little flair. The next morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, I backed the forklift out of the side yard and lifted the Tesla down in full view of the street. A dozen neighbors watched from their porches. Cameras rolled. I placed it carefully on Francine's driveway, exactly where it had blocked mine days earlier. I didn't say a word, just lowered the forks, backed away, and tipped my hat to the growing crowd. Someone clapped, then another. Before long, the entire street was cheering. The noise brought Francine to the window. She peeked through a sliver in the blinds, but when she saw the cameras and the applause, she vanished again. Later that week, I got a letter from the interim trustee. It thanked me for my cooperation and noted that, due to the audit findings, my property was fully cleared of violations. The HOA would be covering my legal fees and reimbursing any costs related to the equipment theft, pending civil court rulings. There was one last thing. A city inspector, prompted by the investigation, had reviewed every contract the HOA filed over the last 3 years. That's when things took a darker turn. Several contractors, including Rick, had been overbilling not just for landscaping, but for emergency sidewalk repairs that were never done. The funds had been diverted into 2 shell companies, both registered under names linked to Francine's relatives out of state. This wasn't just a bad HOA president. This was a multi-party fraud ring. The DA's office filed additional charges: mail fraud, racketeering, and because HOA dues had been siphoned from residents using the postal system, it moved into federal jurisdiction. Francine's bail was revoked. She was remanded pending trial. The neighborhood, once silent and wary, came alive. People planted new gardens without fear of citations. Kids rode bikes without being chased off sidewalks. A retired Marine down the block painted a mural on his garage, an eagle tearing through a red tape curtain. And me? I got my forklift back. Police found it in a rented storage unit registered to Rick's cousin. It had been stripped of identifying plates, but the serial number etched under the seat matched my paperwork. They returned it with an apology note from the chief investigator. I added a new sign to my garage. Unauthorized parking will be elevated. The best part? The new trustee opened the floor for board nominations. Joanna was nominated. So was Marcus. And me. I declined. Some people like power. I prefer torque. 2 weeks after Francine was taken into custody, Heather Ridge Estates was quieter than it had been in years. Not a single bogus fine had shown up on anyone's door. The laminated flyers were gone. The clubhouse, once a throne room for Francine's power plays, sat locked and unused. But the real fallout hadn't even started yet. I was back under the hood of my truck, replacing a busted serpentine belt, when Lorraine called. Her voice had that clip tone she used when something big dropped. "The feds are involved," she said. "They're treating it as a white-collar crime operation tied to a broader investigation into HOA fraud across the state." I sat up, grease on my hands, heart suddenly hammering. "You mean this wasn't just her little scam? She's part of a network." They found bank transfers from Heather Ridge's HOA account to a real estate holding company in Nevada. That company's connected to 2 other HOAs under investigation. All were inflating vendor contracts and siphoning money through the same channels. I wiped my hands on a rag, mind racing. So what's the endgame? They're building a racketeering case. If it sticks, the penalties will be severe. And they're asking you to testify. I didn't hesitate. They want me on the record, I'll be there. Good, she said. They're also requesting access to your security footage archives. Everything from the last 6 months. They can have it. Every frame. The next morning, 2 federal agents met me at my place. One was a tall, wiry man in a gray windbreaker who introduced himself as Agent Monroe. The other, Agent Thayer, was younger but had the kind of stillness that said he didn't miss details. "We're coordinating with the district attorney," Monroe explained while setting up a portable scanner on my kitchen table. "Your footage is crucial. It establishes a pattern that mirrors activity in 2 other neighborhoods. Same types of forged citations. Same contractors. Same shell companies." Thayer pulled out a printed map. Red circles marked 3 other HOAs across the county. All of them used the same landscaping vendor, Langley Services. All had sudden board changes within a year of signing long-term maintenance contracts. I leaned over the map. So Francine wasn't just greedy, she was recruited. Monroe nodded. Possibly compensated to run interference while the fraud was executed. That changed everything. Up until then, we'd seen Francine as a petty tyrant obsessed with control. But now it looked like she had been a willing cog in a much larger scheme, a scheme that preyed on communities by weaponizing bureaucracy and fear. The agents took copies of the footage, signed off on the chain of custody, and left with a promise to keep me in the loop. Later that week, Lorraine called again. They've frozen over $200,000 in HOA accounts across the network, and the judge has authorized seizure of assets if convictions go through. Francine's house? Already under hold. Rick's equipment yard? Locked and tagged. Word spread fast. Residents who'd stayed quiet before started speaking up. One by one, people came forward with records, unauthorized assessments, bounced refund checks, even threats of foreclosure for late fees that had never been real. Joanna organized a formal statement signed by over 60 homeowners and submitted it to the Federal Oversight Committee handling HOA fraud. Marcus coordinated a public forum inviting a local reporter from the city's investigative desk. The story ran the following Sunday under the headline, "Small Town HOA Unravels Statewide Fraud Ring." It went viral. Within days, the other HOAs involved were named. Their boards resigned en masse. In one case, residents voted to dissolve their HOA entirely. Back in Heather Ridge, the temporary trustee, an accountant named Dolores who wore be-on-the-lookout ties and didn't tolerate nonsense, called an emergency meeting to announce the next steps. The HOA will remain under state supervision until the audit is complete, she said. After that, residents will vote on whether to restructure, reform, or terminate the association. For the first time in years, the room erupted in cheers. I stayed away from the spotlight. I didn't need it. I just wanted to get back to my life. But the ripples kept coming. One afternoon, I got a call from the prosecuting attorney's office. They were moving forward with indictments. Not just for Francine and Rick, but for 4 others across the state, people who'd served on multiple boards and manipulated elections to install friendly leadership. Your testimony is scheduled for next month, the prosecutor said. We'll handle transportation and security. You're a key witness, Mr. Sellers. The day arrived in a blur. Federal court. Tall ceilings, cold marble, the kind of place where lies don't last long. I took the stand, told the truth, and presented the evidence, footage, emails, correspondence, the whole chain of events. The jury listened closely. At one point, I heard someone gasp when the prosecution played the audio of Francine instructing Rick to make it disappear. When I stepped down, the judge nodded once. That was enough. 3 weeks later, the verdict came. Guilty. Francine was convicted on 7 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and violation of fiduciary duty. Rick, 8 counts. The others varying sentences. Fines, asset seizures, and in 2 cases, prison time. Francine got 5 years. No parole. Her assets, including the Tesla, were liquidated to repay victimized residents. Back in Heather Ridge, we voted. 82% opted to dissolve the HOA. It wasn't instant. It took months of paperwork, meetings with the city, and coordination with legal counsel. But eventually, Heather Ridge became a self-governed neighborhood. No more board. No more citations. No more laminated warnings. We formed a volunteer committee to handle common area maintenance. Real volunteers? No one with access to the bank account without triple verification. People started putting up porch swings, hanging wind chimes, repainting their homes however they pleased. Life returned to normal. Better than normal. One evening, I stood in my driveway watching a couple of neighborhood kids race scooters down the sidewalk. Joanna walked up with a clipboard. We're planning a block party, she said. Barbecue, music, maybe a dunk tank. You in? I nodded. Only if I get to build the dunk tank. She grinned. Thought you might say that. As she walked off, I looked down the street. Homes lit up with porch lights and laughter. Lawns a little uneven. Paint colors a little mismatched. It wasn't perfect. And it didn't have to be. Heather Ridge was finally free. I turned back to my garage, flipped on the light, and got to work. No laminated rules. No threats. No Tesla on the roof. Just peace, tools, and people who'd reclaimed their neighborhood.